The Iranian regime is melting at breakneck speed as its system is forced to shut down before the eyes of the entire world. Regime had claimed it would survive for years. They built their entire survival strategy on military hot conflict and guerrilla scenarios. But the hot conflict ended, and in its place came something far bigger and far more ingenious. Something that would shut down the regime's entire system. Total blockade, without firing a single bullet. Moreover, even if the US does not engage in any direct military action, as of May 1st, current indications and satellite footage points the regime's system collapse in just 6 weeks left. President Trump says their pipelines are close to exploding. Reports say the country runs out of oil storage in 12 to 22 days. The Tehran administration, because its onshore oil storage tanks have reached their limits, is struggling to keep the system afloat by pumping extracted crude oil directly into tankers waiting at sea. This tactic, known in the industry as floating storage, is actually an emergency step taken to postpone the system's lockup. These massive ships waiting offshore are not being used to deliver their cargo to global buyers. These ships serve only as temporary storage, to relieve the lethal pressure at onshore facilities and keep the oil wells running. Calculations by open-source intelligence analysts and Foreign Policy's Comprehensive Energy Analysis, dated April 28, 2026, show that this floating capacity can buy the regime only 2 to 6 weeks of time. In other words, this floating capacity provides the regime with only 14 to 42 days of breathing room. When we bring together these technical data and calculations, the mathematical inevitability of the approaching crisis becomes clear. The blockade strategy the United States has implemented at the Strait of Hormuz is turning time and financial isolation into a devastating weapon, instead of striking refineries with missiles. The Washington administration does not want to spend billions of dollars worth of JASSMER missiles or risk air assets. Instead, it is pursuing a completely silent and attritional strangulation tactic, without giving Tehran the external attack motivation it could use to rally its restless population around. This blockade is cutting off every form of foreign currency inflow by closing the borders. When all onshore and offshore storage is full, the risk of pipeline pressure reaching dangerous levels and the system physically reaching a bursting point is extremely high. Shutting down an oil well is not like turning off a water faucet at home. When production is halted, the natural pressure balances underground begin to deteriorate. Reactivating that well months later requires enormously large-scale technical work and billions of dollars in new investment. When limited storage capacity overflows, the system will be forced to halt oil extraction. Although regime officials are trying to create breathing room for themselves with old tankers waiting at sea, they cannot prevent the real danger from growing from within. Oil is the main bloodstream of this state mechanism. When this flow stops, the state's institutions begin going bankrupt one by one. According to leaks obtained by the Wall Street Journal, the decision to extend the blockade indefinitely shows that the Trump administration is not offering Tehran an honorable way out. Conditions are growing increasingly severe, and the system is being left to be crushed under its own weight. So, when the foreign currency entering the state's coffers approaches zero, how do you keep that massive military and bureaucratic structure that has dominated the region for years standing on its feet? Intelligence agencies are meticulously calculating the duration the regime can keep the economy afloat using its existing oil reserves. Despite the absence of a hot military engagement with missiles flying, Iran's main economic lifeline is being dragged to wiped-out status. Economic isolation is devastating not only the state's foreign trade, but also the salary system, the fundamental motivation of the internal security apparatus. When the tankers at sea fill up and overflow, and the onshore storage tanks sound the alarm, the Tehran administration will have no tangible asset left that it can convert to cash. These data reveal that at the end of the 6-week period, Iran will face not merely a temporary logistical bottleneck, but a full-blown existential state crisis. The closing of oil valves is merely the first stage of a devastating domino effect. The halt of foreign currency entering the state's coffers reflects directly on the kitchen table of the person on the street and on the wallets of the security forces protecting the regime. In its current state, the Iranian economy is passing through an extremely severe turbulence. The inflation rate has skyrocketed to 67%. With the currency losing value at record levels and 2 million people losing their jobs, this crisis has pushed the country into what is essentially a survival struggle. The shaking of the economic structure to this degree is creating a wave of destruction that penetrates every cell of the social fabric. The state mechanism has begun distributing emergency food coupons worth $7 per person just to keep the population standing at a minimum level. In a picture where the monthly minimum wage hovers around $130, the fact that even an ordinary block of cheese sells for $5 shows the severity of the situation. Those distributed coupons mean not so much alleviating the desperation, but officially confessing the scale of the crisis. While people form long lines to access basic food items, black market activities are spreading rapidly. The government's impotence in managing this crisis is giving rise to a silent but deeply growing accumulation of anger on the streets. This economic crisis is also striking the security bureaucracy that keeps the state standing at its very heart. Regimes may start loyalty with ideology, but sustainability always depends on financial power. The day you cannot pay your armed forces is the day the boundaries of your authority effectively begin to erode. Reliable reports from the field confirm that the police force has received late payments on multiple occasions. Military personnel have clearly been documented as not having seen a salary for months. Expecting a soldier or police officer who cannot bring bread home to clash with their own people on the streets for the sake of the regime's survival is a massive strategic miscalculation. Currently, desertion cases across every level within Iran's security forces are showing a serious increase. The erosion and disciplinary losses in the regular army prove that the system is rotting from within. This extraordinary fragility within the state apparatus is gradually laying the groundwork for a massive mutiny wave. Unpaid salaries are bringing not just individual desertions, but also the weakening of the chain of command at command levels. A structure that cannot find motivated police to patrol the streets, that cannot keep its soldiers at their units to guard the borders, becomes fragile even without a military operation from the outside. The blockade is doing what military intervention could not. It is detaching the human resources that form the regime's protective armor from the system through financial starvation. Of course, this shockwave is not confined to Iran's borders alone. The US blockade also carries heavy bills reflected on global markets. According to analysis compiled by the Wall Street Journal from global market data, gasoline prices in the American domestic market have risen to $4.18 per gallon, squeezing consumers. Global fertilizer prices have climbed to 90% above pre-crisis levels, threatening the agricultural sector. Global supply chains are suffering serious wounds from this geopolitical lockdown. However, the Washington administration views these costs as a strategic price and is choosing to bear this burden. In the long-term plan, weathering these fluctuations in the global economy, rather than spending expensive munitions, is shaping up as a highly rational choice for weakening Iran from within. The regime is gambling that the US will tire of global economic fluctuations and ease the pressure. The White House's decision to extend the blockade shows that this gamble will turn out against Tehran. As the 6-week window narrows, the financial drought inside is feeding a full-blown chaos environment. The public's attempts to withdraw their small savings from banks, access to basic products reaching a standstill, and the uncertainty on the streets are causing the state's civilian authority to rapidly evaporate. While the economic crisis hits the streets, a fierce and ruthless power war is unfolding in Tehran's closed political corridors. While the state mechanism is expected to unite around a common mind during crisis moments, the situation in Iran is following an entirely different course. The fault lines between the civilian government wing and the military wing, particularly the IRGC, are fracturing with a great roar. Civilian leaders, seeing the approaching storm, are striving to keep diplomatic channels open in order to stop the bleeding and provide relief to the country. As conveyed in Al Jazeera's crisis bulletin dated April 12, 2026, the foreign minister's directive to open the Strait of Hormuz to civilian ship traffic was a clear reflection of this pragmatic approach. But this reasonable step by civilian authority was instantly sabotaged by the military hawks. On the very same day as the foreign minister's directive, the IRGC Navy took a radical decision, attacking ships in the region and effectively keeping the strait closed. This action was not merely a harsh message to the outside world, It was also the unmistakable indicator that the internal division had reached a point where the civilian government had completely lost its decision-making initiative. The IRGC has forcibly seized the country's steering wheel from civilian politicians. The president, parliament, and foreign affairs bureaucracy are being progressively isolated from strategic decision-making mechanisms. But the military wing's seizure of power contains an unsolvable paradox within itself. The IRGC has taken the helm of the state, but they are completely devoid of the economic resources to finance the massive structure they have seized, the salaries of millions of civil servants and public services. Holding power when the coffers are empty means shouldering the entire political and social cost of the crisis alone. On one side, civilian cadres who want to sit at the negotiation table and ease sanctions wait helplessly. On the other, hardline commanders who brand this as treason try to maintain the status quo. On the diplomatic front, Tehran's thrashing is crashing against the cold wall Washington has built, as reflected in CNBC's diplomatic reports dated May 1, 2026. Iran is trying to buy time and break the blockade by conveying updated new ceasefire proposals through Pakistan. While these diplomatic initiatives cause short-term fluctuations in global markets, they do not change the actual reality on the ground. The Trump administration is not conducting a classic bargaining process. Rather, it is shaping the situation in line with its own strategic objectives. On the table are not mutual concessions to be negotiated, but extremely heavy conditions imposed by Washington. The US mathematically knows that time is working in its favor and prefers to wait rather than enter a military escalation. Patience here has become a weapon as great as the blockade itself. Historical references show quite clearly where regimes that cannot pay salaries and whose civilian authority has been shattered end up. Systems that lose the ability to finance their armed forces disintegrate from within, without being subjected to a major military intervention from the outside. The dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, the fall of the Gaddafi regime in Libya in 2011, or the unraveling of the Assad regime in Syria in 2024, fundamentally occurred through the ruptures that the same financial crises created in the security bureaucracy. In Iran, too, the clock is ticking with the same mechanism. The pragmatist wing within the IRGC, the segment that has been transferring the country's wealth to safe havens abroad for years, senses the approaching destruction. The moment they understand the system will go completely bankrupt, the probability is high that they will sacrifice the rigid ideological wing to secure their own assets and futures. This sharp division within the regime is laying the building blocks of a palace coup or high-level purges in the near future. As the blockade continues, the divisions inside deepen further. Money runs out, and the state mechanism slowly locks up. The system that waged influence struggles across the Middle East geography for years is now becoming the victim of its own strategic dead end and America's financial encirclement. The answer to the question of what happens after the oil tanks overflow is quite plain. Production lines will halt, the currency drops flowing to the treasury will dry up, and the economy will begin dissolving, starting first with the security apparatus. This encirclement that holds Tehran in trapped position is rapidly eroding Iran's very capacity for statehood. The oil-laden tankers waiting off the shores of Karg Island are nothing but temporary mirages postponing the regime's approaching end. Analytical data reveal, with mathematical certainty, that storage capacities will reach their limits within 6 weeks. When that moment arrives, the pumps will fall silent, the oil wells will close, and the lifeline sustaining the economy will be severed. A state cannot survive an equation where it cannot pay its armed forces, where it lacks the human resources to draft its children under arms, and where its own administrators have turned on each other. Washington's silent strangulation strategy is paralyzing Iran's points of resistance from within. The regime's massive security structure is currently advancing rapidly toward the collapse phase. Time is flowing, money is running out. For Tehran, the process of collapse is now measured not by missiles, but by a clock that is directly ticking. So, as these 6 deadly weeks unfold, who is the real power holding the state hostage from within? And why are they standing by and watching this destruction unfold? When we bring all these developments together, the structural reality that emerges is this: Iran can no longer be analyzed as a state in the traditional sense. Iran is a structure, where a powerful paramilitary network holds decisive influence over both armed forces and political institutions at its core. Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei is in a coma, unaware of his own appointment. President Pezeshkian's real authority is extremely limited, even if he's not under house arrest. IRGC Commander Vahidi is managing the tactical war and torpedoing every diplomatic channel. And Galibaf, leader of the negotiation team, has been sidelined by his own regime's military wing, despite being IRGC origin himself. When we analyze this structure, what we see is a military organization disguised as a state. The IRGC is not just an army, it's also Iran's largest economic actor. A massive empire in construction, telecommunications, petrochemicals, and banking. If peace comes, this empire is questioned. If war continues, it grows. This is the structural reason why the house arrest claims, true or not, seem so logical. For the IRGC, peace is more dangerous than economic collapse. 5 explosions were reported in Tehran this morning within less than a minute of each other. Then, Iranian sources said these were air defense systems being tested and that there was no attack. This was a drill, but its timing is concerning. Coup claims, ceasefire expiration, missile displays, and air defense drills all within the same 24 hours. Iran is either preparing for war or sending its own people the message that we are in control. Perhaps both. And this fragility makes Iran easier to manipulate for external actors. Russia and China may see the IRGC as a preferred partner, because military regimes are more predictable in their ideological rigidity. But that same rigidity deprives Iran of diplomatic flexibility and increases the risk of escalation at every crisis point. Iran's proxy networks, Hezbollah, Houthis, Iraqi militias, could be used more aggressively under full IRGC control. And this could drag the entire region into chronic instability. The nuclear dimension is also concerning. Full IRGC dominance could accelerate enrichment activities and make any nuclear deal impossible. Red lines drawn by figures like Vahidi eliminate the flexibility of civilian negotiators. Approaching the military nuclear threshold could trigger a regional arms race. Saudi Arabia and Turkey may face pressure to launch their own nuclear programs. And the likelihood of a preemptive Israeli military intervention rises because under IRGC dominance, diplomacy no longer works. The next 6 weeks carry the nature of a harbinger, a change that will redraw the geopolitical map of the Middle East. Share in the comments. Please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications.